Daniel had always loved traveling to quiet places, far away from the noise of the city. As a young photographer, he wanted to see real life through his camera, not just the usual tourist spots or popular landscapes. He believed that true beauty was hidden in small, unnoticed corners of the world, and the desert lands of the American Southwest had always pulled him like a magnet. So when winter arrived, he packed his bags, set up his Jeep, and drove deep into the desert, hoping to capture something rare, something peaceful, something real. The desert in winter was different from any place Daniel had visited before. During the day, the sun stayed mild and soft, warming the skin gently. But the nights turned extremely cold. The wind would blow across the sand like a silent breath, making the air sharp and freezing. Daniel had prepared for this by bringing a thick sleeping bag, warm clothes, and a strong tent. But even then, every evening when the sun went down, the temperature dropped so quickly that he had to rush to light his small portable heater. On the third evening of his trip, something unusual happened. Daniel had just finished taking photos of the sunset, the sky glowing in soft pink and orange colors, when he heard a faint sound, almost like footsteps. At first, he thought maybe it was an animal, a rabbit or a deer. He turned his head slowly, scanning the area, but he saw nothing. The desert had a way of playing tricks on people. Sometimes, silence felt like sound, and small sounds felt like echoes. He shrugged it off and went back to packing his camera. But a few minutes later, he heard the sound again, this time closer. When he turned around, he saw someone walking slowly toward him. At first, he wasn't sure if it was a child or a young adult. The figure was small, wrapped in a long, dark shawl, moving carefully over the sand. As the person came closer, Daniel realized it was a girl, maybe around 17 or 18 years old. She looked tired, and her hands were folded against her chest, trying to hold on to warmth. Daniel felt a sudden wave of concern. She didn't look hurt, but she looked cold, very cold. Her cheeks were slightly red from the freezing wind, and her lips were pressed tightly together, as if she was trying not to shiver too visibly. She had long black hair braided neatly, and her clothes seemed traditional, different from modern winter jackets. He stepped forward gently, not wanting to scare her. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked with a soft voice. The girl looked at him with large, calm eyes. She didn't speak right away, but after a moment, she nodded slowly. Still, Daniel could see she was struggling with the cold. Winter in the desert was not kind, and being out there without proper protection could be dangerous. "Are you lost?" Daniel asked again, trying to understand her situation. She shook her head this time. Her expression was peaceful but unreadable, like she carried her own thoughts quietly. Daniel didn't know what to do at first. He looked around, hoping someone else might appear with her, a family member. Maybe, but the desert was empty and silent. There were no signs of other people nearby. "Do you need to warm up?" he asked, pointing toward his tent. The girl looked at the tent for a moment, then back at him. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something. But she didn't. Instead, she took a small step forward, then another, slowly walking toward the tent. Daniel understood her gesture as a yes. He gently opened the tent flap and motioned for her to enter. "It's warm inside," he said kindly. "You can sit for a bit." The girl stepped inside the tent with quiet footsteps. Daniel followed after her, making sure to close the flap quickly so the cold air wouldn't rush in. Inside, the small heater glowed faintly, making the space warm and comfortable. The girl sat down near it, placing her hands close to the heat. Daniel noticed how relieved she looked, even though she tried to remain calm. He removed his gloves and sat across from her, giving her space but staying close enough to show he wasn't ignoring her. For a while, they didn't speak. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was gentle, like two strangers sharing a peaceful moment in an otherwise harsh environment. After a few minutes, Daniel finally asked, "Do you live around here?" The girl nodded. He smiled politely. "I'm Daniel," he said, tapping his chest lightly. She watched him for a moment, then replied softly, "Atsa." Daniel repeated the name slowly, making sure he said it correctly. She gave a small nod, which he took as a sign that he got it right. He tried to start a simple conversation, asking how far her home was or if she needed help. But her answers were short, sometimes just nods or hand gestures. Still, she didn't seem afraid of him. In fact, she seemed strangely calm, almost as if she knew something he didn't. Daniel noticed her eyes drifting around the tent, observing everything the camera placed neatly in one corner. The travel map pinned near his bag, the small lantern, and the notebook lying open with sketches and quick notes. She didn't touch anything, but her eyes moved with gentle curiosity, as if she was trying to understand who he was. He didn't mind. "I'm a photographer," he explained, seeing her gaze pause on the camera. "I travel to take pictures of different places." Atsa nodded, her eyes moving back to him with mild interest. Daniel wasn't sure if she fully understood what he meant, but she didn't seem confused. Instead, she lifted her hand slowly and pointed toward the desert outside the tent, then placed her palm on her chest. He wasn't exactly sure what she meant, but he guessed she was saying she belonged to the land, or perhaps her people did. He respected that. He had read enough to know that Native American tribes, especially the Apache, had deep, spiritual connections to the land. The wind outside grew colder, and Daniel could hear it brushing against the tent. He looked at Atsa again. She seemed warmer now, but he could tell she was still recovering from the cold. He wondered where her family was or why she had been walking alone in such freezing weather. He didn't want to overwhelm her with questions, so he waited patiently, hoping she would speak when she felt ready. After some time, she reached into her shawl and pulled out a small handmade charm made of feathers and beads. She held it carefully, almost respectfully, before placing it gently on the ground between them. Daniel didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure if it was a gift or if it meant something else entirely. She looked at him with steady eyes, her expression calm but meaningful. Daniel felt a slight confusion rising inside him. The gesture seemed important, but he didn't understand the deeper meaning behind it. He smiled politely and nodded in thanks, assuming that was the right response. Atsa also nodded, as if confirming something silently. Then she breathed out softly, almost like a sigh, not of sadness, but of trust. Daniel didn't realize it yet, but that single moment would shape the rest of the night. For now, all he knew was that he had helped someone who needed warmth, someone who had appeared out of nowhere in the middle of a cold desert evening. His mind was calm, but a small thought lingered quietly. He had invited her in simply to help her warm up, but he had no idea that the night was about to teach him something far bigger than he expected. Inside the tent, the warm air gently softened the coldness that had followed Atsa. The small heater kept the space comfortable, and Daniel felt a sense of relief knowing she was no longer freezing. Still, the silence between them held a kind of mystery. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it carried questions, many questions, that neither of them had spoken yet. Daniel watched her quietly as she warmed her hands. Her movements were calm and graceful, as if every motion had purpose. She did not seem afraid of him. Instead, she looked peaceful, almost thoughtful, like she had entered the tent not by accident, but for a reason she understood clearly, even if he didn't. He tried not to stare, but he couldn't help noticing how observant she was. Her eyes moved gently over his belongings, not in a nosy way, but in a curious, meaningful way. It was as though she wasn't just looking at objects, she was trying to understand him through them. Her gaze paused on his open notebook. Daniel glanced at it too. Earlier, he had written small observations about the land and sketched a few rock formations he found interesting. To him, it was just part of his traveling habit. But to her, it seemed to hold a different kind of meaning. He gave a small smile. "I write things so I don't forget," he explained softly. "I draw too, when I don't have my camera ready." Atsa looked at him, her calm expression softening a little, almost like she appreciated the idea of keeping memories in such ways. She pointed toward the sketch of a stone circle he had found earlier near a cliff. It had looked interesting to him, because it was arranged too neatly to be natural. He had guessed it might be something historical, but he hadn't been sure. "You know this?" he asked gently. Atsa nodded slowly, her eyes lowering for a moment as if she was thinking deeply. Daniel leaned a little forward, curious. Is it something important? She didn't speak right away, but she lifted her hand and shaped a small circle in the air with her finger, then pointed again at the drawing. He understood she recognized it, but her expression told him it meant much more. He wanted to ask more, but he didn't want to push her. Instead, he waited. For a moment, the only sound inside the tent was the soft hum of the heater and the wind pressing gently against the fabric walls. Outside, the desert night had grown darker, and Daniel could imagine the stars shining brightly above them, untouched by city lights. Finally, Atsa spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Old place," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Our people. Go there." Daniel nodded slowly. "Is it sacred?" She nodded. He felt a sudden awareness wash over him. He had sketched something important without understanding its meaning. He felt humbled. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I didn't step inside it. I just drew it from far away." This seemed to comfort her. She gave a small nod, as if acknowledging his respect. Atsa continued studying the items in the tent. When her eyes settled on his camera, Daniel gently lifted it and showed it to her. "This helps me tell stories," he said. "Not the same way your people tell stories, but still, stories." She leaned forward a little, not touching the camera, but observing it closely. Daniel turned it on and flipped through some of the pictures he took earlier. Beautiful shots of the desert landscape appeared on the tiny screen: the sunset, the rock shapes, the long shadows stretching across the sand. Atsa watched them quietly, her face softening. For a brief moment, she looked almost reflective, as if the images reminded her of something she carried in her heart. Daniel noticed her interest and smiled, happy to share something with her. "If you want," he said, "you can take a picture too." She blinked, surprised. It was clear she had never used a camera. He gently placed it in her hands, but kept his fingers lightly on hers to guide the weight. She looked down at the device as if it were something fragile and new. "Here," he said softly, "just look through this part. When you see something you like, press this button." Atsa slowly brought the camera up to her face. For a moment, she held it too close, and Daniel chuckled lightly. "A little farther," he said gently. She adjusted, and finally, her eye aligned with the viewfinder. He waited patiently as she looked around the tent through the lens. She moved slightly, focusing on the lantern, then the heater, and then the tiny charm she had placed between them earlier. With a soft click, she took her first photo. She lowered the camera and stared at it, as if she had just done something magical. Daniel showed her the image. It wasn't perfect, but for her, it seemed to hold something special. Atsa gave a small smile, small, but real. It was the first time Daniel had seen her expression brighten like that. He felt the moment settle warmly between them, but then, something unexpected happened. Atsa gently placed the camera down and picked up the small handmade charm she had given him earlier. She held it between her fingers and then placed it back in his hands once more, this time with a more serious expression. Daniel was confused. "You already gave me this," he said kindly, but she shook her head slowly. She touched the charm, and then touched her own chest, then pointed to the ground under the tent, and finally to him. Daniel stared at her, unsure what she meant. "I don't understand," he said softly. Atsa didn't seem frustrated. Instead, she patiently repeated the gestures. She touched the charm, then placed her hand on her heart. She pointed to the tent floor, and then pointed directly at Daniel. He tried to make sense of it. Was she saying thank you? Was she saying the charm was connected to her somehow? Or that it was supposed to stay in the tent? Or that it was meant specifically for him? He wished he understood her language better. The way she communicated wasn't confusing, it was meaningful, but he didn't know its deeper context. He gave her a gentle smile, hoping to show respect. "Is it important?" She nodded firmly. "Is it a message?" he asked. She nodded again. Daniel felt a soft tension rising inside him. Not fear, just curiosity mixed with worry. that he might accidentally misinterpret something meaningful to her culture. He tried again. Is this a symbol? Atsa inhaled softly and nodded once more, her eyes holding his in a steady, quiet way. He held the charm carefully. It had small feathers, beads, and a tiny stone woven into a simple design. It wasn't decorative. It carried purpose. He could feel that just by holding it. She watched him with expectation, as if waiting for him to recognize something important. Daniel finally said, "It feels special. I can see that." Atsa's expression softened again, and she looked relieved. She seemed satisfied that he understood at least the seriousness of the object, even if he didn't know the exact meaning yet. After that, she shifted her attention to the map pinned near his bag. She slowly got up and walked toward it. Daniel followed her gaze. The map had his route marked with a red pen. Atsa raised her hand and pointed to an area he hadn't visited yet, an empty space near the stone circle he had sketched. Daniel looked at her questioningly. "Is something there?" She nodded. He frowned gently. "Should I not go there?" She shook her head immediately, as if saying that wasn't her meaning. "Should I go there?" he asked. She paused, then nodded slowly. He blinked. Why would she want him to go there? Was it something important, something she wanted him to see, or something he needed to understand? The air in the tent felt heavier, not in a bad way, but in a way that hinted at a deeper story approaching. Atsa turned back to him and sat down again, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She looked comfortable, as if she felt safe inside the tent. Daniel wondered if she trusted him because he had given her warmth, or because she recognized something in him he didn't yet understand. Minutes passed quietly. Daniel tried to ask simple questions like, "Are you hungry?" Or, "Do you want water?" She accepted the water, sipping slowly, but she didn't take food. He didn't insist. Then, in a voice softer than before, she said, "You good man." Daniel blinked, surprised and touched. "Thank you," he said gently. She gestured to the tent again, then to him, then made a small circular motion with her hand, as if describing something bigger than the space they shared. He didn't understand fully, but he sensed that to her, entering his tent was not a small thing. It held cultural meaning. It carried trust. It meant something he had not expected at all when he first invited her inside. Slowly, the pieces of a puzzle began forming in Daniel's mind, though the picture was still incomplete. He had thought she just needed warmth. But now, he was beginning to realize that she had chosen his tent for a reason she had not yet explained. And the charm she gave him, it wasn't just a simple thank you. It meant something deeper, something important in her world. Daniel didn't know it yet. But this misunderstanding, shaped by different cultures and traditions, was about to lead him into a story he would never forget. The night grew deeper, and the wind outside the tent softened a little, almost as if it too was waiting to hear what Atsa would say next. Daniel sat quietly, aware that something important was happening, even if he didn't yet understand the shape of it. Atsa had been calm the whole time, but now her silence carried weight. She wasn't just warming her hands anymore, she was gathering her thoughts. Daniel waited, giving her space. He didn't want to rush her. Everything about her, the charm, the quiet gestures, the way she kept studying him with thoughtful eyes, told him that she lived in a world guided by meanings he didn't yet know. Finally, she lifted her face and looked straight at him, her expression clear and steady. She placed her hand gently on the charm again, then brought it to her chest. Her voice was soft but certain as she said, "I come for this." Daniel blinked in confusion. "For the charm?" She shook her head softly, then said, "For what it means." He frowned slightly, not out of frustration, but out of sincere curiosity. "And what does it mean?" Atsa took a slow breath and looked toward the tent entrance, as if the story she was about to tell belonged to the whole desert, not just to her. She spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. "In my people," she said, "winter is time for learning, time for stories, time for walking with the old spirits." She paused for a moment, letting the words settle in the warm tent air. "Tonight, I was part of a walk, a long walk, Daniel listened closely, trying not to miss even a small detail. We walk every winter, she continued. We follow old paths. We listen to the land. It teaches us. It keeps us close to who we are. She placed her hand gently on the ground below them. The land remembers us. Daniel nodded slowly. He had read about Native American traditions, but hearing it from someone living them made it different, real, meaningful, alive. Atsa kept speaking, her voice steady. We move as a group, together. But tonight, the wind changed direction. A storm came fast. We had to split for a little time. My group went toward the mountains. I was told to follow, but the sand blew too strong. I saw nothing. Daniel felt a gentle ache in his chest, knowing she had been alone in that cold storm. I kept walking, she said. I kept trusting. The old paths sometimes disappear in winter. But if you listen with your heart, the land speaks. She touched her chest softly. Right above her heart, it said, "Go forward." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "That's how you found me?" Atsa nodded. "I saw your light from far away. I knew someone was here." And then, she paused, her eyes drifting to his map. "I saw the stone circle mark on your book." Daniel turned toward his notebook, now understanding that his sketch had caught her attention earlier. "That circle," Atsa said, "is old. Very old. My people. We go there only with respect. Only for learning. It is a place where the land listens back." Daniel's eyes widened a little. "I didn't know. I'm sorry if sketching it was disrespectful." She shook her head calmly. "No. You did not step inside. You watched from outside. That is respect." Then she looked directly at him again. "And it is why I trusted you." Daniel blinked, surprised. "Trusted me? Because of that?" She nodded. "Because you listened to the land without even knowing." Her words warmed something inside him. "I really didn't want to disturb anything sacred." You didn't," she said softly. "You saw it the right way." Daniel felt a quiet pride in that moment, not the kind that came from accomplishment, but the kind that came from being seen for his intentions. Atsa then reached into her shawl again and pulled out something else, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She placed it gently in front of him. Daniel looked at it but didn't touch it until she nodded. Inside the cloth were dried herbs and a small, carved symbol made of wood. It looked simple but carried the same deep meaning as the charm. He looked up at her questioningly. She explained, "These are for guides. For people who walk with the land, even when they do not know its ways yet." Her gaze softened. "Tonight, you were placed on my path. I believe that." Daniel felt a slow realization forming. "You mean, you believe we were meant to meet?" Atsa nodded once, firmly. He swallowed quietly. Not because he was nervous, but because the moment felt important. He didn't want to misunderstand her words. He didn't want to make the wrong assumption. Still, he had to ask gently, "So when you came to my tent, what did you think?" Her eyes softened even more. "I thought you knew." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "Knew? What?" She pointed at the charm again. Then at him. "This is not only for thanks. It is for trust. For choosing someone." She paused, watching his face carefully. "In my people's way, giving this charm means you ask someone to guide you or to walk with you. But also," she gestured between them, "you accept to watch over them for the night." Quote, Daniel felt a deep breath fill his chest as everything suddenly made sense. She wasn't asking for anything inappropriate. She wasn't implying anything romantic. She wasn't doing anything out of place. She had followed her own cultural meaning. He had invited her into his tent thinking she only needed warmth, but she had walked in believing he understood a sacred gesture. He felt embarrassment rise softly inside him, not because he had done something wrong, but because he now realized how big the misunderstanding could have been if he had acted differently. "I didn't know," he admitted quietly. "I thought you were just cold and needed a place to warm up." Atsa gave a tiny smile, gentle and kind. "I was cold, she said. But I was not afraid. I thought you understood the charm. He looked at the charm again, feeling the weight of its purpose. I didn't understand then, but I think I'm beginning to understand now. You listened, she said. That is enough. The wind outside calmed completely. Silence filled the tent, but it was warm and peaceful. Neither of them felt uncomfortable anymore. They had crossed the bridge of misunderstanding. Daniel then asked softly, "Why did you want me to go to the place on the map?" Her eyes brightened a little. "Because you saw its value even before you knew it was sacred. The land spoke to you. People like that are rare. I wanted you to see more." Daniel nodded slowly. This wasn't just a meeting of two strangers. It was a moment of connection between cultures, between ways of understanding the world. Atsa continued, "When I walked alone in the storm, I prayed for guidance, and I saw your light. I believed the ancestors brought me to your camp. That is why I trusted you. That is why I came inside." Daniel felt humbled. He had seen many unexpected things in his travels, but nothing like this, nothing that felt like destiny moving two paths together. He asked quietly, "Are you afraid now, being away from your group?" She shook her head. "No, I am safe here. And at sunrise, I will find my people again." "Will you let me help you find them?" Daniel asked gently. She nodded with calm confidence. She wasn't lost anymore. She knew her direction now. She just needed the night to pass. Daniel leaned back slightly, breathing deeply. The misunderstanding that had sat quietly between them had dissolved. In its place was a clear bond of respect. As the night continued, Atsa began sharing stories of her tribe, of winter walks, of old traditions that taught strength and patience. Her voice flowed gently like a quiet stream. Daniel listened like a child hearing something magical for the first time. He told her stories too about his travels, his family, his reasons for wanting to understand the world through a camera. She listened with the same calm interest, nodding at the right moments, smiling softly at certain parts. Both of them came from completely different worlds, yet inside that small tent, warmed by a tiny heater and a shared moment of trust, those worlds felt connected. The night felt long, but not in a tiring way. It felt like time had slowed just enough to let their stories breathe. And as Daniel watched Atsa resting peacefully later, wrapped in warmth she had finally found, he realized something simple but powerful. He had entered the desert searching for beautiful pictures, but what he had found instead was a story, one that was far deeper than any photograph he could ever take. The first hint of morning appeared slowly, like a shy light creeping across the desert sky. It began as a thin silver line on the horizon, barely visible through the fabric of the tent. Daniel opened his eyes to the soft glow. Sensing the night had finally ended, he felt warm, not just because of the heater, but because the tent now held a peaceful, calm energy around them. He turned his head slightly and saw Atsa sitting quietly, already awake, her eyes fixed on the pale dawn outside. She sat still, almost like a statue carved from quietness. Her face carried a calm strength, as if morning had brought her clarity. For a moment, Daniel just watched her, trying to understand the subtle way she held herself balanced, thoughtful, connected to something he could not fully see. "Good morning," he said softly. She turned her head and nodded with a small smile, the kind of smile that said she appreciated the new day, not just the words. "You didn't sleep?" Daniel asked gently. "A little," she replied in her soft voice. "Enough." Daniel stretched his hands and sat up fully. The charm she had given him still lay beside his sleeping bag, safely placed so it wouldn't get lost. He looked at it for a moment, remembering everything she explained the night before. The symbol was no longer confusing to him. It was something he respected deeply now. Atsa glanced at the charm too, then looked back at him with approval. "You kept it close," she said. Daniel nodded. It felt wrong to put it anywhere else. She gave another small nod, pleased. The wind outside was calmer than the night before, and when they stepped out of the tent, the desert felt transformed. The sky had turned into shades of gold and soft blue. The sand, usually rough and dry, looked smooth and peaceful under the early sunlight. Daniel took a slow breath. "It's beautiful." Atsa closed her eyes for a moment and lifted her face slightly toward the sun. "Morning is always a blessing," she said. "The land wakes up with us." Daniel admired how naturally she connected with everything around her. He had met many people on his travels, but none who felt so deeply part of the world they lived in. After a moment, she pointed toward the east, a direction where the desert stretched wide and open. "My people are there," she said. "Not far." Daniel nodded, preparing to help. He packed the tent quickly while Atsa folded her shawl neatly. Even the way she packed her things had a graceful rhythm, slow but precise, as if everything had its own meaning. When they were ready to leave, Daniel offered her some water and a bit of food. She accepted a little this time. Thanking him with a polite nod, the walk toward her people began quietly, with only the sound of footsteps crunching softly on the sand. Daniel tried to follow her pace. She walked lightly, as though she had done this path 100 times. Occasionally, she glanced at the ground, noticing signs he could not see, footprints barely visible, small shifts in the sand, broken twigs, or tiny marks left by the wind. Every detail seemed to speak to her. He admired it. "You can read the land better than anyone I've ever met." She smiled softly. "The land teaches us if we listen." The sun rose slowly, coloring the desert in warm shades. As they walked, Daniel found himself thinking about everything that had happened. He had started this journey hoping to capture beautiful photos. He had ended up capturing something else entirely, an experience, a connection, a story he knew would stay with him forever. Atsa noticed his thoughtful silence. "You think much," she said. He laughed gently. "I guess I do. Last night was more than I expected." She nodded, understanding. "Sometimes the land sends who we need," she said. "Even if we do not look for them." Daniel glanced at her. "You think I was sent for you?" Atsa held his gaze calmly. "I believe so. And maybe I was sent for you too." The words settled warmly in his chest. Not in a romantic way. Not in any confusing way, just in a simple truth. They had helped each other. They had understood each other. They had been strangers only for a moment. After walking for almost an hour, Atsa paused. She looked ahead, shading her eyes with her hand. Daniel followed her gaze, and far in the distance, he saw small movements, shapes, rising and falling behind low dunes. "People, that's them," she said, relief touching her voice. Daniel smiled. "Good. You'll be home soon." Atsa didn't rush toward them. Instead, she stood beside him for a moment, watching the distant figures with calm gratitude. "You helped me through the night," she said softly. "That is not small. You helped me understand something bigger than myself." Daniel replied. "That is not small either." She gave a gentle smile. The morning light made her seem almost glowing, as if the desert had wrapped her in its own warmth. When her group finally came closer, Daniel could see they were a mix of elders, adults, and young people. They looked worried at first, scanning the area. Then, when they spotted Atsa, their expressions softened with visible relief. One of the elders stepped forward, a tall man with deep lines on his face, eyes calm and wise. Atsa approached him and bowed her head slightly. The elder placed his hand lightly on her shoulder, a gesture of care. Then, he looked at Daniel. "You watched over her," the elder said, his voice steady and warm. Daniel nodded respectfully. "She found me in the storm. I just helped." The elder's eyes softened. "You did more than help." He looked at the charm still tied to Daniel's hand. "She shared this with you?" Daniel glanced down, suddenly aware of its meaning again. "Yes," he said softly. The elder nodded with approval. "Then you honored it well. Not everyone understands gifts of trust." Daniel felt humbled. "I'm grateful she trusted me." Atsa stepped closer and said something to the elder in her own language. He listened, then nodded and placed his hand over his heart, a sign of respect. Then he turned to Daniel and said, "She says you are a good traveler, one who listens. People who listen are rare." 73. Daniel felt a warm feeling move through him. He didn't know what to say at first, so he simply nodded in gratitude. Atsa then walked back to him. She held out a small object wrapped in cloth. "For you," she said. Daniel looked surprised. "Another gift?" She shook her head slightly. "Not like the charm. This is only for memory. For friendship." He opened the cloth slowly. Inside was a small stone, polished, smooth, with a tiny symbol carved on one side. Simple, beautiful, peaceful. "I will keep it," Daniel said. "Thank you." Atsa nodded, her eyes calm and steady. "Remember this place. Remember the night. It was meant." "I won't forget," he said sincerely. They stood quietly for a few more seconds. There was no need for long speeches. The silence between them held everything they had shared. Finally, Atsa stepped back toward her people. She walked with quiet confidence, and they welcomed her with open arms. Daniel watched her join them, feeling both happy and a little emotional, as if a meaningful chapter had just closed. As her group moved farther away, Daniel remained standing in the desert morning, holding the small stone and charm carefully. The wind brushed past him gently. Nothing like the storm from the night before. He looked toward the land, the wide open space that had brought them together. It felt different now, not just a place for photography, but a place that had taught him something simple and powerful. The world was filled with hidden stories, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. He packed his things slowly, taking one last look in the direction Atsa had gone. He didn't know if he would ever meet her again, but the memory of her calm strength, her trust, and her stories would stay with him forever. As he drove away, he wrote a few words in his notebook. "Sometimes people come into your life not to stay forever, but to guide you for a moment you didn't know you needed." The desert road stretched ahead, warm under the rising sun, and Daniel continued his journey with a peaceful heart, carrying a charm of trust, a stone of friendship, and a story that would stay with him for the rest of his life.